Welcome to this webinar, Mining and Climate Change, Preventing Social Environmental Impact in a Fast-Changing World. A couple of house rules. There is interpretation available in 4 languages, in Chinese, in English, in French, and in Spanish. And please select the language and click on the planet icon on the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer. And on the top of your screen at the More menu, you can select the language as well. And even if you're learning English right now, please select the English language because soon you'll get other languages mixed up otherwise. So please select your language. And there might be some delays in interpretation because of the 4-language interpretation. So please bear with us. There might be some slides here and there. And because of the 4-language interpretation, we ask you as well to send us questions in advance that we can then use in the Q&A session at the end of this session. Now, the great news is we have over 600 registrations for this event from 80 countries. So we thank you all for being with us here today. Now, my name is Jaime de Bourbon-Parme. I'm the Climate Envoy of the Netherlands, but today I'm with you as the chair of the Advisory Council of the Responsible Mining Foundation. And the other host of today's session is CCCMC, which is China Chambers of Commerce of Metals, Minerals, and Chemicals Importers and Exporters. So because of both of them, welcome to this session. Now, there's a continuous increase in demand for metals and minerals because of the global efforts to transition to lower carbon energy sources. So we need less oil, gas, and coal, but more solar panels, wind turbines, etc. So we need more mining to be able to make that transition. And in the absence of efficient recycling value chains and real circular economy models, this puts greater pressure on mining sites for primary extraction. As shown by the Responsible Mining Foundation research, we are far from achieving responsible mining, even among the largest mining companies that have a lot of resources. But research and experience also shows that responsible mining can be done. And in the context of climate change, this will require thoughtful leadership and collaboration amongst all stakeholders across metals and minerals value chains and that put people and the environment first. Now, we're only a couple of days away from COP26, which is the climate summit in Glasgow. And this is an important topic that needs to be put at attention at these global conferences, but it's still not there yet. So we are avant-gardes, we are ahead of the curve. And it's really exciting that we are here today to discuss this issue. And I'll be bringing to the climate summit some of the messages that are here today. Now, we have an exceptional panel of speakers who will speak from a range of experiences to address the topic of this webinar, which is the prevention of social environmental impacts in the context of mining and climate change. Now, I'm quickly seeing if our first host speaker is already available. Let me quickly. In absence of him right now, I would like actually Professor Tang, the Deputy Director of the Institute for Energy, Environment and the Economy at Tsinghua University in Beijing, to give us a little bit of a context for this topic. And his research interests include energy and climate policy analysis and international climate regime. And his research has supported China's preparation and submission of the 2050 Low Emissions Development Strategy and China's National Determined Contributions. He's the lead author of China's National Assessment Report on Climate Change. Mr. Tang, may I ask you the first question? In the context of climate change, and please feel free to put on your camera. In the context of climate change, energy transition and achievements of this, and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, what are the challenges and impacts faced by multinational companies? Mr. Tang?
好的，非常感谢。
Thank you very much, moderator, and the organizer for inviting me to share with all of you the MNC and mining industry, how they can prevent socio-economic impact risks in the context of climate change. The Paris Agreement confirmed the temperature rise target, which is lower than 2 degrees Celsius, and we are striving to realize the 1.5 degree temperature increase. But the new report shows that the global temperature rise has reached 1.1 degrees before industrialization and continues to increase at a rate of about 0.2 degrees per decade. Among them, greenhouse gas emissions caused by human activities are the main cause of climate change. At present, global GHG emissions are about 60 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, among which the amount of carbon dioxide emission is about 40 billion tons, and the amount of remaining greenhouse gases is about 20 billion tons. In order to achieve the temperature rise target, it is necessary to achieve net zero emissions by 2080. So we need to realize net zero emission between 2070 and 2080. And we need to put this time 20 years ahead. CO2 needs to realize net zero by 2050. Currently, different countries have announced ambitious targets, but from the MNC perspective, because of the trade and economy globalization, MNCs become the main emitter. The latest report shows by 2016, the supply chain emissions is about 6 billion tons, accounting for 18.5% of the total emissions. The main driver is the globalization cost, production expansion. In recent years, as the FDI has declined, the supply chain emissions of MNCs have declined. But in order to realize the carbon neutrality target in 2050, all the global supply chain emissions of MNCs need to decline by 200 million tons so that we could realize the target for 2050. So such a target, in the context of no big changes will take place in trade, it is not easy for us. Fossil energy industry has been negatively influenced according to the production gap report by the UNDP. Though all the countries stated their emission reduction commitment, but their oil and natural gas production are not cut down, which is far from achieving the 1.5 degree target. So the coal consumption will be doubled. Oil will be increased by 57% and natural gas by 71%. The extraction industry is different from the global situation. Some key metal development will get a larger margin for growth. For example, the EV development requires large amount of cobalt, lithium, and rare earths. The demands will exceed the current explored reserve. So in the future, the mining industry will significantly influence the peoples and the environment because the rare metal demand requires us to do a better job in recycling and the construction transformation of supply chain. So in the future, in the context of climate change, the mining industry faces the following opportunities and challenges. Although the emissions of MNCs have declined in recent years, they still account for a relatively high share of global emissions. In the future, further actions are needed to help the world achieve carbon neutrality. In the process of low carbon transition, MNCs and mining industry face increasing uncertainty in policy, technology, and investment due to the different expectations of production and consumption, especially for the extraction of fossil energy and rare metals. It will have impacts on the prices of fossil energy and rare metals. The impact will be great. So these deserve our attention in the future transformation. The demand for rare metals will rise sharply, and the environmental and social responsibilities of the mining process cannot be ignored. MNCs in developing countries can make full use of their latecomer advantages and fully consider the requirements of low carbon, environmental, and social responsibilities in the process of building supply chains. So this is what I'm going to share with you. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Tang, and it's great to meet you and to be with you on this panel. And indeed, we're far from achieving our goals, and we hope that the ambition at the climate top in Glasgow will be rising and rising. But a lot more needs to be done, and indeed, it is good to get that point of view that we need more and more rare metals, and we need to make sure that the impact of that mining is reduced to the minimum, and we need more recycling. So the message has been well received. May I now give the word to Mr. Liu, who is our co-host today. He's the Vice President of CCCMC, the Chinese Chambers of Commerce for Metals and Minerals, Chemicals, Importers and Exporters, which is a non-for-profit organization, but its annual import and export volume of its members account for nearly 30% of the industry. Mr. Liu, the word is to you.
I apologize, I had some technical issues earlier. So next, I would like to deliver my speech. A distinguished moderator, Madame PIAGET, and our friends online. Good afternoon and good morning. I'm Liu Zhonghui, the Vice President of China Chamber of Commerce of Metals, Minerals and Chemical Importers and Exporters. Today, CCCMC and the Responsible Mining Foundation are co-hosting this webinar to discuss the issue of mining and climate change. First of all, I would like to welcome our guests and the audience for taking part. Right now, climate change is a global challenge we all face, and is the most prominent problem for the international community. And we need to take urgent and effective actions to implement the Paris Agreement and to achieve the 2030 UN SDGs and promote the transformation of energy. And in the process, the mining industry can play a major role, and we face a challenge in emission reduction and new energy development. And currently, we can see that there are both opportunities in this process on capitalizing the carbon assets of enterprises. As an industrial association, CCCMC will take advantage of our strengths and take proactive actions to promote efforts in this regard. We will develop standards, improve mechanism, and build systems to create an environment of green development. We will also support companies in scientific and technology innovation and explore technical solutions for CO2 peaking and carbon neutrality. Mineral resources are essential to global economic development and the implementation of the SDG goals. And it is closely related to the climate change topic. And how will climate change further increase the risk for the mining industry, and how can the mining industry contribute to the implementation of Paris Agreement? These are the questions we should think about. And I hope this webinar can inspire new ideas. And I wish this webinar a complete success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Liu, and thank you for hosting us. Ms. Piaget is the CEO of the Responsible Mining Foundation, is the other host of this webinar. Ms. Piaget, welcome, and in the research that the Responsible Mining Foundation does in assessing the policies and practices of mining companies, what are the most pressing issues for continuous improvement in responsible mining in the context of climate change? Ms. Piaget?
Thank you, moderator, and also to the other speakers who raised the challenge for us of what we need to look at. I know that other colleagues will also mention more technical things, but we'd like to provide a summary from the perspective of the research that we do at the Responsible Mining Foundation. So bearing this in mind, we'd like to start by saying and reminding everyone, as we know we've got listeners and an audience around the world, we're all in this together. We're all in this together, both for climate and also for mining. And why do I say this? So as we all know, and as we've just heard, climate change is affecting every part of the planet. So it is time for us, at least on this issue, to put aside the competition that we normally see in the mining industry and to focus on collaboration and sharing leading practices, because the challenges we need to achieve are so great. We really need to learn from one another and share those leading practices. Then as far as mining itself is concerned, we're also in this together. All societies are dependent on mined resources. And at the same time, we need to manage the tension between the need for mined resources, which we've just seen set out by Dr. Tang, and the need to prevent the harmful impacts of mining that are still quite prevalent and that lead to the concerns which many have around the mining industry in general. So to bring us to the energy transition, it is clear that the low carbon energy transition will lead to more mining activity. Whatever one tries to do in terms of recycling, and we've heard Dr. Tang say we need to do more, it is still so that there will be more mining required. So it is even more important to emphasize the importance of responsible mining across all issues, not only climate-related issues, given the risk that increased demand and the rush that will require might lead to lower standards overall. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, particularly, we know that announcements by mining companies of targets for eliminating greenhouse gas emissions often reach the headlines, especially in the financial press. This is understandable and it's welcome. Though such commitments are made, we must remember, by today's CEOs on behalf of a few more generations of CEOs to come into the future, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. So we need to see short-term targets, if this is to be believable, that the CEOs of today who make those commitments start showing short-term targets with regular reviews and incisive actions to reduce emissions. And we'd like to see regular disclosure on progress, if this is to be believable. What you see here is a slide that represents some of the results from the Responsible Mining Index in 2020. And you'll see that we measure across a range of measurement issues: commitment, which is policies; actions, which speaks for itself; and effectiveness, which is how much companies are actually taking, making targets on those commitments, reviewing the targets, and also acting on that review, making corrective action. And as you see, it's easier to make commitments than it is to achieve effective outcomes. So we see this though in the RMR reports for 2018, for 2020, and for the preliminary results for 2020, we see the same. It's not encouraging. And the results show that companies really improve quite rapidly on establishing policies and principled commitments, like, for example, greenhouse gas emission targets overall. But the momentum slows when this comes to taking action on these commitments, and there's even less evidence of companies managing the process through to target setting, review, and corrective action. In fact, what one would expect, actually, from any well-run mining company. So investors regularly remind us that climate is local. I've heard that so often from investors and financiers who track the performance of the companies they finance and invest in. They want to see disaggregated data at the mine site level. And the mine site is, of course, where climate adaptation and mitigation need to happen in practice. So let us not forget about all the other non-greenhouse gas issues that mining activities influence and might aggravate in the context of climate change. And here one considers issues like water, both quantity and quality, land use, reclamation, and of course, food security, working conditions for workers in hotter and colder temperatures, and of course, the transition from economies and environments that have been dependent on coal for many generations, and things like emergency preparedness for workers and communities, and the risks of abandoned and closed mines. So in summary, to speak to the question that the moderator posed, and in terms of climate-related challenges for mining companies, if one is to simplify this, we really see three challenges. And these are the overarching challenges, and they require collaboration, but also shared learning. And so you see the first we identify as the scope 1 and scope 2, the greenhouse gas emissions for each company, and then managing the supply chain greenhouse gas emissions, and all the collaboration and the learning and the shared activities that this will entail to achieve that, including, of course, recycling activities. And lastly, let's not forget to manage the mine site impacts on people and on environments and other stakeholders at the mine site. This is one of those challenges which is fairly unique to the mining industry, and that they have on top of the other challenges of climate that most other industries have to look at. So our researchers are often asked, so what makes a difference? What makes a difference to company performance if one looks at environmental, social, and governance issues, or particularly in terms of climate? And our research consistently shows that we see better performance as a result of mandatory regulations. It can be government, or it can be requirements for joining a certain organization, investor requirements or financial requirements from the financiers, supply chain customer demands that keep growing, and of course, consumer awareness. But the one that is really in the hands of companies themselves, that they don't have to react to, but can be proactive about, is leadership. Companies, most importantly, can show leadership by themselves. And we see that often is the thing that differentiates one company from another, where they don't wait for regulation or for other forms of pressure, but actually start taking the lead and doing the right thing. So coming back to my starting point of we're all in this together, many companies have shown during the COVID crisis how to behave as good neighbors, both by helping workers and those around the mine sites in a practical way, like sharing medical facilities, and also as financial stabilizers by acting very responsibly in financial context within the countries where they operate. So companies do not have to wait for governments and for COP26 decisions to show leadership in their own context and in the context of climate change to allow good neighborliness to guide their actions. I'll stop there. Thank you to the moderator.
Thank you very much. This is a very clear message and a call to action to this whole industry, and not just the industry, but everybody associated with this in a multi-stakeholder fashion. And I would like to move to Mr. Sun, the director of CCCMC, and he's also the chairman of Responsible Cobalt Initiative. Mr. Sun, great to be with you today. And as important chambers of commerce, how does CCCMC promote continuous improvement and foster learning to support sustainable actions in climate issues amongst your members? Mr. Sun.
All distinguished moderator, Madame PIAGET, and the distinguished leaders, guests, good morning and good afternoon. I'm Lihui. And now we face very severe climate change risks, which have brought major disasters to humans and led to conflicts and security risks, extreme weathers and the melting of glaciers, melting of the permafrost, sea level rises, as well as a change of ecosystem, increase of droughts and floods, all the risks we are experiencing now. And according to World Nature Research Institution, the development of infrastructure and mining are threatening 80% of the endangered species, and among which energy and the mining industry has posed a threat to 18% of the endangered species. And mining industry is also one of the 4 factors contributing to deforestation.
Mining has caused 17% of deforestation in tropical and subtropical countries throughout the whole life cycle and the whole supply chain. In different stages, because of the production difference, actually the impacts are different. Many organizations have started to study on the new nature-based solution and business model. They hope to share and drive up the industrial transformation and share the sustainable value through innovation, circular economy, new energy, and some other measures. Because of the high exposure, high sensibility, and high substitutability, mining has become one of the major risks of climate change. In reverse, and the different disasters caused by climate change will fatally damage mining industry. In order to help the Chinese enterprises in foreign countries to identify and prevent and govern the social responsibilities, CCCMC attached great importance to the responsible business behaviors, and we provided enterprises with a series of professional services, for example, standard development, the thematic training, consulting, advisory, due diligence, international cooperation, grievance, and consultation, etc. In the mining industry, we have developed 4 standards, including the Chinese due diligence guideline for mineral supply chain, guidelines for social responsibility in outbound mining companies, cobalt refiner supply chain due diligence standard, especially the cobalt ASM, the cobalt refiner supply chain due diligence standard has become one of the only widely accepted standard and accepted by different companies and different countries. In the context of climate change and biodiversity conservation, we conducted our works in 4 aspects. The first is about the awareness raising. Through developing some standardized and modularized training course, we provided professional trainings for enterprises in the environmental field. We provided the environmental management system, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, the mine closure and reclamation, soil, air, and water pollution prevention, and some other trainings. In the standard development, upon the interest of the World Bank, we participated in the project of Forest Smart ASM mining standard. We want to use the standard to prevent deforestation. In climate change and biodiversity trainings and the carbon neutrality and the performance assessment and the international standard interpretation and the enterprises strategies in biodiversity risk management, etc., are provided to the enterprises. For example, in the best practice and excellent case study, we summarize the best practices of global mining companies in practice. Our target is to build some typical examples, replicable and promotable in biodiversity among mining companies. And through the hierarchical method, we could create a new business model in promoting the partnership network, and we launched a Mayhaw Mining program. Why it is named as Mayhaw Mining? That is because we hope, based on the environment-friendly methodology. May means a beautiful environment, and Hao means a harmonious society. In environmental issues, the mining industry will undertake the following missions, and we will develop a roadmap and a biodiversity program and roadmap and a series of conservation handbooks to help enterprises to make improvements. And also we will initiate a mining mineral supply chain works and initiative, and which will be started in next April. In assessment, we encourage the enterprises to make use of the industrial standards. We set up an expert team, and now we are trying to select the pilot companies for pilot work. We hope to help enterprises to identify gaps with standard so that we could help them to incorporate standard in their management and to increase their transparency. Also, we hope more enterprises will join us. In the interest of time, I will stop here. Thank you very much for listening.
Mr. Sun, I might have a quick follow-up question. Knowing that China is the biggest destination for metals and minerals, and it's so important to have these standards also based in China, how do you coordinate global standards with other bodies like the OECD? Are you influencing them or influencing you? Are these standards similar? Back to you, Mr. Sun.
Actually, in developing our standards, we adopted the multi-stakeholder participation method. We have established the partnership with OECD. It's a strategic partnership. Together with OECD, we developed the responsible cobalt supply chain standard, which refer to OECD standards. I think you could find the OECD website, and on the website there are our standards, which is accepted by the international stakeholders. Thank you.
No, it's wonderful to see this interaction between the different bodies of standards set globally, but it's actually happening, and that's an important message also to the community listening today. Now, next I would like to give the word to Dr. BRYDEN, and he's the head of Business and Security Division, DCAF, which is the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance. Dr. BRYDEN, thank you for being with us. And may I pose you the next question? Given the potential social economic disruption that climate change can cause at mining operations, can you share some examples about the role that companies and their security arrangements can play to minimize this disruption and act constructively towards society? And Mrs. Piaget already said there's many different impacts that mining has, and your focus is security. The word is to you, BRYDEN.
Well, thank you very much. And it's really a great pleasure to be here. And I'd like to thank the co-hosts and close partners at the Responsible Mining Foundation and CCCMC for giving us the opportunity to be here. I also agree that it's very timely and not just in advance of COP26 next week to look at this issue of mining and climate change. I can only echo the sentiment that we're all in this together, or to put it differently, everyone needs to do their part, companies, governments, and civil society. I'm also very grateful that we include a focus on security issues and security arrangements as part of this discussion, because indeed, I think that security is an important underemphasized part of the wider climate challenge. It has major impacts on businesses operating in complex environment, notably the mining sector. And fundamentally, climate insecurity disproportionately affects the most vulnerable people in fragile states. Now, my organization, DCAF, works globally to promote good security sector governance through security sector reform. And as an organization, we acknowledge the centrality today of climate security to wider efforts to promote security, development, and respect for human rights. And there's a reality there that sustainable solutions to climate insecurity can only be found when companies, governments, and communities work together. And it's for this reason that DCAF works together with the International Committee of the Red Cross to promote best practices that can help companies manage those security challenges responsibly. And I'm also in that respect very happy about our close and growing cooperation with CCCMC to promote best practices with the Chinese companies and the Chinese mining sector. And I think to start with, I'd like to say that the focus of this discussion is on preventing negative impacts in the mining sector. And that's absolutely right. but I'd also like to focus on the positive impacts that companies can generate in this area. Now, security risks linked to climate change are not necessarily new. Phenomena such as food insecurity, drought, and desertification are in effect risk multipliers that in fragile states exacerbate existing tensions and inequalities, fueling population displacement, social tensions, instability, and conflict. And I think as reflected in this side, companies can help manage and address these challenges through mainstreaming business practices that apply a holistic approach to their security arrangements. It's not just about the security and safety of company operations and personnel. Of course, that's very important. It's about relationships with the host state in the context in which you operate and how you engage with local communities. Very specifically, companies can and should ensure the accountability and transparency of their security arrangements, insisting on a whole of government approach involving multiple agencies and actors to ensure that climate-related security issues are addressed transparently and not securitized. Companies can also encourage climate-sensitive security policies, pushing for targets related to greenhouse gas emissions from the security sector when supporting and providing protection, because the security sector is often kept outside of such targets. Also, and research shows this, the greatest impacts of climate insecurity fall on women, vulnerable populations, including the old, marginalized groups and migrants. And in this respect, companies can ensure that their security providers are vetted and trained to be proportionate and gender responsive in their responses. And finally, I think my last point is companies have a key role to play in engaging with communities to understand climate security risk multipliers and to work together with communities and other stakeholder groups to address them. And I'd like to be very concrete because the notion of multi-stakeholder engagement on security isn't an abstract concept. It's a living reality in many contexts where mining companies operate. Now, the photos on this slide, they show the action from a multi-stakeholder group in South Kivu, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a group created and supported by DCAF under the auspices of the Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights. And here you see mining companies, local government, civil society, communities, and security providers sitting around the same table to use their collective knowledge and influence to address security challenges. This kind of group also plays an important monitoring role that can help assess, anticipate, and address climate-related security risks. It's really prevention in action. And these groups, they operate not just in the DRC, but in contexts such as Colombia, Ghana, Peru, Nigeria, and soon Mozambique. Now, I think the good news, and some of the other speakers have alluded to this, is that a range of standards, guidelines, and multi-stakeholder initiatives exist that can support companies in the mining sector to apply such a holistic, multi-stakeholder approach to their security arrangements. For mining companies and the extractive sector more broadly, there's of course the Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights, the Voluntary Principles Initiative, which mainstreams multi-stakeholder engagement through the kind of in-country working groups I just related to, but also work through the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the UN Global Compact, the work of the OECD, the International Code of Conduct Association in the area of private security, all promote multi-stakeholder action through both good practices and processes on the ground. And I would strongly encourage the companies that are participating in this, if they haven't done, to engage with these initiatives. DCAF's been an observer to the Voluntary Principles Initiative for at least 10 years. And I can say there's much openness, including to Chinese companies, to engage and exchange experience within initiatives like this one. Now, my last point is that good practices and lessons are available to support companies to continuously learn and improve in this area. And exactly this holistic approach to security that I mentioned earlier can be found in the DCAF ICRC Toolkit on addressing security and human rights challenges. It's non-prescriptive. It focuses on real-life challenges. And I think fundamentally, it doesn't reinvent the wheel. It takes the existing network of international standards and practices and seeks to operationalize them. We're currently working on a revision to this with the Geneva Center for Business and Human Rights, but the toolkit is already available in English, French, Spanish, and Chinese. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to highlight training modules for Chinese companies on responsible security that we're currently developing with the ICRC, CCCMC, and Renmin University. And all these tools are freely available on the DCAF ICRC Knowledge Hub, and you can see the link here. So to conclude, I'd really like to thank the organizers, the co-hosts, for increasing awareness on mining and climate change in this way. Climate-related security risks and challenges are significant, but I genuinely believe there are also great opportunities to move things forward if all stakeholders work together. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. BRYDEN. And maybe one quick question to you do you see climate as a threat multiplier or as a cause of conflict around mining?
I think it's not a binary distinction, to be honest. What we see is that the stresses around climate and climate change are exacerbating a range of tensions, social tensions, and also inequalities. So somehow the challenges are on both levels. But I think the key message I would have is that if you address the issue purely as a security issue in a narrow sense, then we won't move forward. We will maybe improve how security is provided, but underpinning all of this is a major governance challenge, which needs to link the role of companies to that of governments and others. And if we improve the governance environment, the transparency and accountability, then it's really the tide by which all ships rise.
Thank you very much. Now we have the view from science, from transparency, from a chambers of commerce, look at the whole industry and standard setting, and now from security. And now we move to mining company itself. And I'm very, very happy to have Mr. Xie, the Vice President of Zijin Mining Group with us. And Zijin Mining is one of the biggest mining companies in the world and has the largest presence outside of China. Now, Mr. Xie, how does Zijin Mining respond to social environmental challenge in the context of global climate change?
Dear moderator friends, good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to take part in this webinar. And as a responsible company, we think we are responsible to take actions regarding climate change, and there is much to be done. First of all, for Zijin mining, we have published our ESG report every year, which includes some of the goals, water resources, utilization, environmental protection indicators, labor protection, and human rights. And these are all included in our report. But as we are talking about climate change, we will take that part out and talk about this part systematically. So our president just mentioned that we will achieve the carbon peaking and carbon neutrality 1 year earlier than the schedule of the government. And we've introduced a number of measures to achieve sustainable development of the company. And we are an active supporter of the Paris Agreement. And we are also part of the Responsible Mining Initiative. And we also support carbon trading. In terms of specific measures, we have developed a PDCA mechanism for mitigation of global warming. And we actively respond to local policies in our host countries and develop a carbon emission system and an energy consumption data platform. And we've been calculating doing calculation on emission, energy consumption, and we are setting our goals for carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. And we've seen a major transformation in our energy structure. We are adopting less energy consuming techniques and biotechnologies in our production. And we also establish new energy companies to issue carbon neutrality bond. And last year, we have generated 1 million kilowatt of hydropower. And we've also planted vegetation, and we restored 2,027 hectares of vegetation, planted 3.5 million trees. In terms of check and act, we have been using our carbon emission reduction mechanism to ensure transparency. And last year, our unit capacity energy consumption of our domestic mines was down by 40%. And we've also take part in carbon trading. And last year we have sold 10,000 tons of carbon together with our Fujian company. And in terms of precaution against extreme climate conditions, we have carried out our work throughout the life cycle of the whole mining industry. And in our project design, we've taken into consideration a number of factors, including local climate and hydrological conditions. And during operation, we have introduced energy saving equipment, made plans on energy saving and emission reduction, and the utilization of clean energies such as water resources and solar power. And we've also adopted automation and the big data technologies to reduce the impact of extreme weathers and natural disasters. And in our closure stage, we have worked on ecological restoration to ensure the stability of water and the soil. So emission reduction runs throughout the whole life cycle of our projects. So climate change brings both challenges and opportunities for a mining company like us. And the carbon emission reduction will also bring us benefits. And there's much space for us to take actions in this regard. And we have further improved our work in renewable energy utilization. We can also provide metals such as copper that's less energy consuming to the market. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I might have a question for you, follow-up question as well, Mr. C, if I'm allowed. And it's, do you notice that companies down the supply chain, so that are consumer facing, are interested in specific mining products that are more environmentally friendly? Are they asking for you to deliver on that?
So for the supply chain, for lithium and copper, these are very good products for carbon emission reduction. And we also have solar power products, and the cost of which is even more competitive. And if we can use that in large scale, we can make greater contribution to emission reduction. And we can better utilize the power generated from that. These are all very good options. And during production, we can produce while restoring the environment. I think that's also an option. This helps the company in its reputation and also promote some related development.
Thank you very much, Mr. C. Now, we have received from the audience quite a few questions online, and we received them through the registration process in advance. And let me go to some of those questions. Maybe, Mr. C, while you're here anyway, maybe let's address you the first question that I received. And what are the suggestions does Zijin Mining Group have for global mining companies, so for other companies around the world, to achieve carbon peaks and reduce carbon emissions? Mr. C.
First of all, we need to fully understand this is very important for the mining companies. Of course, it is also very good for Zijin Mining because there are a lot of margin for us to reduce the cost, the consumption, and to optimize our design. We have a lot of work to do in this regard. And we need to fully understand it is very significant for us. Opportunities are greater than the challenges. And also we need some scientific study. And we need to understand it is something we need to do. And also there are a lot of works, but we need to be progressive, and we cannot take very, say, hasty actions. And third, we need to embrace new energy. And this is an opportunity for us to realize the target. And fourthly, and we need to be contextualized and through the land reclamation and also the carbon emission, etc., we could realize the goal. Thank you.
Sorry, Thank you, Mr. Xie. We saw the slide of Ms. PIAGET, who showed that a lot of companies have plans, then they implement the plans, and then they need to check if they're actually having the impact, and that it's easier to make plans than actual implementation. You have that in your planning as well. What is your advice to mining companies around the world to go beyond planning to have actual impact?
In carbon footprint, we need to check, for example, in our supply chain, and the coals from the supply chain can be labeled, and we could choose some low carbon products into your product line. And the energy consumption, I think we need to explore some more positive impacts. For example, we can use some lower consuming facilities, equipment, and also some energies. And of course, we could use the wind power, solar power, tidal power, the clean energies. Also, in production, we need to consider the recovery. For example, the mine site will interrupt the environment, but we need to minimize the impacts. And also we could recover the environment. So actually the mine sites could recover the environment according to a very high requirement and standard. For example, in Africa, say some mine sites even can create a better environment around the mines. So I think all these practices could change the people's understanding and view towards the mining companies.
Thank you very much. The next question is to Dr. BRYDEN. How would a mining company go at identifying security-related risks posed by climate change, like displacement? Dr. BRYDEN?
Thank you very much. I think that there's two aspects to answer that question. One is that there needs to be a fundamental and ongoing process of risk assessment and analysis by the company, and that is not something that should disassociate climate risk from the other risks I mentioned, but rather it should be understood as something that can exacerbate, increase, and accentuate those risks. And there is a range of good practice and learning, I would say, that is available from companies themselves in terms of this risk assessment process around security arrangements and how that can be mainstreamed through company operations. So that would be my first point. My second point would be there is a tendency in many contexts and in many companies to treat security as a narrow issue and as a technical issue. And the best way to keep on top of these kinds of security risks and challenges is to understand it as a whole of company issue that doesn't just relate to the security functions, but to corporate social responsibility, to community relations, to the internal functions of the company. So I think those aspects are very critical. And the final point is this is not a theoretical exercise. It's not something that can be developed in abstract. So the closer the direct engagement with local communities, local governance actors, security providers, and others in a trust-based framework around company operations is the best way to understand what is happening and to identify ways to mitigate those challenges. Thank you.
Jaime, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. No, Mrs. Sun, I've got the next question for you. What are the biggest difficulties and bottlenecks for CCCMC in promoting the fulfillment of social responsibilities by companies?
Thank you, moderator, for the question. In recent years, in helping enterprises to fulfill social responsibility and supply chain compliance, we have done a lot of work and accumulated a lot of experiences. But meanwhile, we face a lot of difficulties. So I would like to answer the question in three aspects. The first difficulty is currently the international requirements are really a lot. According to the incomplete statistics, there are 30 standards, but the biggest problem is so many standards, but less toolkits to support enterprises integrate the social responsibilities into their management. So we need to develop more practical toolkits and empower the enterprises. Secondly, in recent years, the international community, especially some European and American countries, have adopted the supply chain regulations and legislations. They urge the enterprises to strengthen the supply chain management, but the stakeholders only advocated, audited, or monitored the enterprises to require the enterprises. Some requirements are really high and urgent. Some companies can only address the symptom, but not the root cause. They have to take a very hasty measures, but the speed are actually slowed down. So we call the international society to be inclusive and allow the progressive improvements. And the third difficulty is the supply chain in implementing the corrective action. Actually, the actors' lack of acceptance or consistency, and the responsibilities or the risks are transferred to the upstream. So we call the enterprises along the supply chain to respond to SDG target 17, that is to build the partnership. Instead of transferring or shifting risks and responsibilities, we need to identify, prevent risks, but not transfer or shift risks and responsibilities. So the three challenges, in a sense, restricted our works and including the enterprise's works. Thank you, moderator.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm just wondering, Zijin, what is the theory of change? What is the biggest pressure to mining companies to move? Is it the financial industry that is asking them? Is it governments that have regulation? Is it the local population, so the license to operate locally? Where do you see the biggest pressure and interest then to engage into standards?
I believe before we have conducted a research that is how to set up an effective incentive framework or mechanism. And just now I talked about the stick and carrot. And sometimes the stick is not enough. We need some carrot. The pressures in front of the enterprises, I think government pressure is there, and say the OECD or some other organizations have adopted the legislations and also the green investment requirement. And financial institutions require enterprises to reach a certain standard to get financing. And also some international community advocated the NGO advocated the social responsibilities of enterprises, and also the consumers community have increased awareness, and they hope to realize a win-win situation together with the enterprises. For enterprises, and they are willing to improve their insufficiencies. And we could see a lot of cases, including Zijin mining. Actually, in this respect, they have a deep experience. They have done a lot of works in fulfilling social responsibilities. And this is the enterprise's response in order to meet the international requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sun. I have a question for Professor Tang. Professor, in the context of global climate change, carbon emission reductions and carbon peaking, what is the relationship between mining industry and sustainable employment? And can the mining industry continue to create employment opportunities? Professor Tang?
I would like to put it this way. Thank you, moderator, for the question. According to our existing research, the carbon reduction policy will influence the job opportunities, especially in multi-sectors. The distribution will be influenced. Allocation will be influenced. The fossil energy producing industry, the job opportunities will be reduced, but in new energy and energy efficiency industry, jobs will be increased. For mining sector, it is the same. As the rare metals demand increased, the related mining industry will experience the job increase, and the recycling industry. But overall speaking, the macroeconomy influence the job opportunities, so we are not quite sure about the final impacts on the jobs.
And through which we can avoid impact on the economy, and through which we can reduce losses and save a lot of job opportunities. So we have to look at it through a holistic perspective. And for a country, for the state, it has to introduce relevant employment policies to support people in relevant industries for transformation toward carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've received another question for Professor BRYDEN. In its research work, the Responsible Mining Foundation assesses companies against several security-related performance indicators, but there is very limited evidence publicly available. Companies may argue that this is security-sensitive information. How can we change this in such an important public interest issues? Professor BRYDEN.
Thank you very much, and it's really a very good question, and we were very happy to work with the RMF on those security-related indicators, because I think it is a new step to start looking and considering with granularity what are those security related indicators for the kind of improvements we want to see. But I think in response to the question, I think what it's actually talking about is the need for a culture change, where companies think differently about the information they share. And that is why multi-stakeholder initiatives are so important, because they provide a forum where companies, government actors, civil society organizations build trust and generate that transparency, because I would say my perspective is insisting will have results to a point, but engaging actively with companies to provide that information and building the level of trust is exactly the way to advance together. And I think the more that companies, and I would say companies from all spectrums, engage together in these multi-stakeholder fora, the more that those cultures and those mindsets will change. And I'll revert to a final point as well. I mentioned before, security is often seen as more of a technical issue compared to social and environmental issues. And I think it's absolutely critical on these issues that senior leadership in companies, that CEOs address and embrace these security issues too. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one last question, again for Professor Tang, and that is, there are many mechanisms and agreements on carbon emissions now. Can we imagine similar agreements and targets on other social environmental issues aligned with the SDGs to drive more responsible mining?
Thank you for the question. Climate change is a global topic for 2 reasons. First, its impact is global. Second, the cost and the benefit of global change is different among countries. So through global cooperation and agreement, we can better achieve the goals. But for other socioeconomic issues, we can coordinate them through global progresses. But many of the social impact are local. We can work at the national and local level to meet the requirements. But global coordination in this regard are also very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes the Q&A part of the call, and maybe ask all the moderators to switch on their cameras, and I'll give one after the other the opportunity to say, a last message you would like to give to this audience. And maybe first I'll give the word to Mr. Xie from Zijin Mining Group. Any closing remarks?
Well, it's really a pleasure to be here. So as a company, we really want to do this well. And we are motivated to do it well. In terms of energy structure, energy utilization, we still have much to do. And as a responsible company, we have to do it well. And then we can have a better future and a greater progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. BRYDEN, any closing remarks?
Thank you very much. I think my final remark is that if there's one single truth about climate change and the climate change challenge, it's that no single actor can address it unilaterally. In that respect, it is the multi-stakeholder issue. And I think we can only advance if we break down silos, join the dots, and work more closely together on every level. So I do think that these issues around the mining sector and around security, the more that they can be raised in profile, and I wish our moderator every success next week in environmental fora, is absolutely key. But I also think issues around climate security should be prominent on fora like the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission or the Security Council as a key part of their deliberations. Again, on the multi-stakeholder dimension, I already mentioned the importance of companies addressing climate security across different functions, but also governments applying a truly whole of government approach to this issue, and not having environmental, international development, security actors working in their different corners. And then with respect to the field of responsible business conduct, it was said in advance that this is an avant-garde webinar, an avant-garde discussion we're having here. Another way to say that is we really need to give it greater prominence. And I think there are a number of opportunities in international initiatives to do that. I think it's absolutely key that Chinese companies and business actors are a strong and central part of that exchange. And I see with new and emerging fora, like the International Forum on Sustainable Mineral Supply Chains, or the Alliance of Chinese Business in Africa for Social Responsibility, that there are opportunities to broaden that discussion and to have a truly global discussion. So I think I'd just like to thank the organizers and all, because it's really about developing these common understandings. And only through doing that can we find ways for collective action, which is really the only way for the mining sector, for people and for the planet as a whole. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Professor Tang, would you like to give some closing remarks?
Thank you so much. I think that my last remark will be regarding to the transition process towards Paris Agreement, because we are talking about to accelerate the transition towards zero emission. And during any transition process, there will be winners and losers. That is a fact. But we must to make the transition towards zero emission as a just transition, that we should care about those vulnerable community and the people during those process. I think that is the only way we can make the transition happen and also accelerate the transition process. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much. It couldn't be better word says, and we really need to accelerate this transition, and there will be losers and winners. But indeed, as Professor BRYDEN also said, more prominence should be given to this topic, and it will in the time to come. So we are ahead of the curve on this dialogue, and we need to be very clear on the positives and the negatives of this this transition and give it the fair attention. And we can only achieve with common action. I can't wrap it up better than that. And now I'd like to give the two hosts of this event, but first Mr. Sin for his closing remarks.
Climate change and the risks has brought a lot of uncertainty to the mining industry, but we have learned a lot from our speakers. Through industrial transformation and change, we will create new hopes and opportunities for the mining industry. We will continue to play a leading role and conduct leading edge researches, expand our international cooperation to empower more companies. We don't want to leave anyone behind, and we would start new initiatives to create a better environment and a better society. We hope we can achieve win-win results and greater harmony in the world to develop green, inclusive, healthy, and harmonious development. We hope that through responsible mining initiative, we can empower companies and create a better world and support the implementation of SDGs. And we hope that more mining companies, financial institutions, and international organizations can join us in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, a lot has happened in this since the 8 years ago. I was working on mining issues from a responsible mining perspective. A lot of dialogue has been much more open and much more frank, and but a lot more needs to be done. Let me give the last word to Ms. Piaget. In light of today's discussion, what do you think is the most important for companies to do. Ms. Piaget.
Well, this has been a really interesting discussion. Thank you. And appreciate all the expert and comprehensive views that we've heard from the other speakers. So one can really only encourage the whole mining industry and all those that support it to keep up the momentum, not only, of course, on the greenhouse gas emission targets, but also I was very pleased to hear Mr. Sear speak about the Check Act part of the process of responsible mining and to share the progress, because we also want to not only check, but also celebrate if there's good progress to be shared along the way. And then lastly, as recent comments have noted, we really need to think about the mine site area to the workers and the communities that are affected by the changes of climate, but also to the changes of the transition, and thinking about a just transition for everyone. And in that respect, I appreciate the fact that Mr. Soon also mentioned the SDGs, because as the overarching agreement that everybody around the world, all countries are supporting, and that we don't forget that climate also needs to be seen in the context of the SDGs. And lastly, to say that something I've always heard most frequently when visiting China and attending conferences in China, how often CEOs from Chinese mining companies actually talk about the next generation and the historic responsibility we have for coming generations in how we mine and deal with today's challenges. So let's keep that in mind as well. Thank you so much to our moderator, and maybe at this moment to also thank the interpreters who we know are working busily behind the scenes. Thank you for your patience with us if we speak too fast. And lastly, also thank you, Mr. Soon, for the great collaboration in putting together this webinar.
This concludes this webinar, and thank you all the audience as well for joining us. And again, we need to do this all together. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.